Starting off at number 10, Jackson Square. Located in the infamous French Quarter in New Orleans, Jackson Square is riddled with terrifying spirits wreaking vengeance. Historically, the square was used for public executions, and it's believed that all who died there haunt the grounds looking for revenge on those who took their life. Those that walk through have felt like they're being followed or seen unexplainable lights and shadows in their photos, and all leave feeling confused and scared that something was trying to get them. So if you are planning to visit, just be careful where you step foot, cause you might not be so lucky as those that have tried before. Next up at number 9, Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop. Despite its name, Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop is actually now a bar, and although it may look like a cute old building from the outside, it holds a few terrifying secrets that haunt the locals to this day. It's believed to be haunted by the infamous brothers Jean and Pierre Lafitte, a pirate duo who used the shop as a front for their smuggling operation quite successfully for many years. The brothers were eventually arrested for their operation, and perhaps that explains why the spirits have never left. Now a bar for locals, the ghost of Lafitte has been seen by many, haunting the pub along with a mysterious woman that appears suddenly in the mirror on the second floor. No one knows just who she is, but those that have witnessed her apparitions were sent running in terror and have never returned. Coming in at number 8, Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. To date, it is the oldest church in New Orleans, so it's no surprise that it also is one of the most haunted places in the city. Back in the day, the building was used as a sort of pseudo-morgue, where they would house bodies waiting to be transferred to the St. Louis Cemetery. Over the years, the church housed many victims of yellow fever and even a few people that had been killed, and it seems the souls stuck to the church despite being buried elsewhere. Those that enter feel immediately watched and have this terrible, eerie feeling that they can't seem to shake. While no one has seen apparitions yet, locals agree that there is no doubt it is haunted, and many avoid it if they can. Next up at number 7, The Haunted Hotel. Very appropriately named, this hotel is the known site of at least 12 killings, and the infamous Axeman of New Orleans is said to have lived at this very hotel during his notorious rampage of the city. Years later, a bloody axe was found at the hotel when undergoing renovations, and it's now actually displayed in the lobby for all to see. Those that have dared to stay at the haunted hotel have witnessed terrifying apparitions, and many have left in the middle of the night fearing that the spirit of the Axeman had come back to hurt them. So stay if you dare, but beware, as it could be your last night in this realm if you do. Next up at number 6, the Jemani Lounge. The site of a tragic fire in 1973, the Jemani Lounge is one of the newer haunted locations in New Orleans. The upstairs lounge at Jemani was a gay bar at the time, when somebody intentionally committed arson, killing 32 of the patrons and brutally injuring hundreds more. The upstairs lounge never reopened, but to this day, the ghosts of the men who died there haunt the halls looking for answers and seeking revenge on whoever did this to them. Visitors of the Jemani bar say that they feel the presence of the tormented souls and often cite inexplicable icy chills, hearing voices when no one is around, and even the smell of burning flesh. So enter if you dare, but make it clear you come in peace, as you never know what might happen if you make the wrong move. Coming in at number 5, the Hotel Monteleone. Built in 1886, the Hotel Monteleone was once a beloved place to rest your head for the night, but it's now a terrifying place full of spirits that shock all who enter. Sadly, many died from yellow fever at the hotel, and the spirits continue to haunt the halls to this day. They can be heard running around the 13th floor, and some guests have even witnessed the spirits asking to play hide and seek or reaching for their hands, saying they're lost, only to disappear as soon as they make eye contact. Another haunting entity is William Wilder, a guest who was killed while staying in the hotel, but there are countless other spirits walking the halls that have yet to be named. Over the years, paranormal investigators have visited, attempting to get the spirits on camera, but all they've captured are creepy encounters that make their spine tingle. Next up at number 4, 4. The Beauregard Kai's house. Now a museum, this house was once home to Confederate General Pierre Beauregard, the Sicilian Mafia, and later beloved author Francis Kais. Ghosts from the Civil War are believed to haunt the museum, and many guests claim to have heard loud footsteps or even seen bloody soldiers, missing limbs with their faces blown off, wandering the grounds, staring blankly into the distance. Legend says Paul Morphy, an acclaimed chess player during the 19th century, was born in this haunted house, and it's believed he was driven mad while living there, becoming possessed by a demon and running down the street with an axe, threatening to kill anyone who came near him. He was later found dead in that same house, and it is believed he haunts it among the soldiers and victims of the mafia to this day. Coming in at number 3, Muriel's Seance Lounge. Back in 1788, Pierre Jordan purchased the building now known as Muriel's Seance Lounge, only days before one of the worst fires to ever hit New Orleans. Determined to fix things, Jordan rebuilt the building and soon called it home. But sadly, Jordan had quite the gambling problem and risked his home on a steep bet while playing poker, and sadly lost his home forever. As the legend goes, Jordan was so distraught about losing his home, he hung himself on the second floor so as not to have to live without it. Today the building is full of spirits. People have heard a strange woman's voice coming from the walls during seances, and many say it is not unusual to witness objects flying across the room or see glasses shattering throughout the courtyard. Some believe the seances have allowed too many spirits to enter and fear that the spirits are becoming angrier and angrier as the years go by. So enter if you dare, just be careful you don't get possessed while contacting one of the many spirits that haunt the halls. Next up at number 2, Myrtle's Plantation. On top of being the site of many tortured slaves during the 18th and 19th century, the Plantation House, now a haunted bed and breakfast, is rumored to be built on top of an ancient burial ground. The most famous ghost that roams the ground is Claire, a slave of the family who poisoned the mother and daughters after having her ear cut off for listening to conversations through a keyhole in the door. Chloe was killed after poisoning the family and is believed to walk the grounds wearing a green turban and terrorizing guests. But she is not alone. At least 12 other ghosts are known to haunt the grounds to this day, including the family that owned the plantation and other souls of the tragic deaths on the property. Visitors have witnessed inexplicable handprints or faces suddenly appearing in mirrors, and the apparition of a girl who will practice voodoo on sleeping guests. So unless you are looking to get possessed in your sleep, it might be best to look for another place to stay. And last up in our number 1 spot, the Ursuline Convent. Back in the 1700s, the convent was run by nuns and housed casket girls. Casket girls were young women who had come from France to marry colonists and got their name from the casket-shaped boxes containing their belongings that they were holding when they arrived. After their arrival, strange things started happening and the girls started disappearing. Locals declared them to be vampires out to kill them. The 3rd floor had been where they were residing, and to protect the nuns and other citizens of the town, it was decided the doors would be sealed shut with nails blessed by the Pope, and no one ever dared set foot on the floor again. That was until 1978, when 2 paranormal investigators wanted some answers to the legend and camped out in front of the convent. As the legend goes, the 2 dozed off during their investigation, and the next morning, the doors that were previously nailed shut had wiggled loose and the investigators were found dead, torn open and drained of their blood. So if I were you, I would leave this off of the list of visiting spots.
Number 10. Café du Monde. Café du Monde is probably one of the most well-known places on this list, mostly for having what many people say are the best beignets in town. But there can be a problem with the service. No, not from the employees, I'm sure that they're amazing, but apparently some people give their order to a waiter only to never have it arrive, or see the waiter again. Since the restaurant is open 24 hours a day, some customers have seen some freaky things at night, including a ghost waiter, who has been haunting the place for decades. No one knows who they might have been, but they must have loved their job a whole lot if they keep coming back to work after they've passed on. Or maybe they worked themselves to death and can't escape the horrors of the night shift. As someone with a lot of restaurant experience, I feel bad for not only the ghostly server, but for the folks who never got their orders. Number 9, the Old French Opera House. Before we move on to number 9, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons so that I can keep bringing you the most amazing videos. While it no longer stands today, and many bars and businesses take up the space where it once was, the Witch of the Opera House still lurks in the area of her final resting place. Her story begins in the 1860s. Her name was Marguerite, and she made quite a splash during her debut, but not because she was a good singer. Apparently she wasn't, but it was because of her beauty. After a while, people began to see through her, and they realized that beauty wasn't enough to carry a show, and her career dried up. Financially ruined after losing her career and husband due to a sudden accident, Marguerite decided to fall back and open a bakery. But there was a problem. She couldn't bake. So she sent for the best Parisian pastry chef that she could find, and he came to work for her. And he was pretty easy on the eyes. They fell for each other and they were happy for years. Then one day she heard that her new husband was cheating on her and had a second apartment that they used as a love nest. Enraged, she went to the apartment in the middle of the night, turned on the gas in the fireplace, and left with the gas leaking out. The chef and the mistress suffocated, and Marguerite broke into the opera house and hung herself from the chandelier in her old costume, which she'd stolen from the production. They say that you can still hear her and see her screaming for her lost love in the street where the opera house once stood. Number 8, the Old Absinthe House. It was originally built in 1752, but burned down in the Great Friday Fire of 1788. When it was rebuilt, it became a place for people to meet and discuss less than savory topics, and have some absinthe, a very strong alcohol that was said to have hallucinogenic properties. While many people gathered for drinks here, there was one meeting that took place that was instrumental in American history. According to the legend, in 1815, General Andrew Jackson called for a meeting with someone you wouldn't expect, a notorious pirate by the name of Jean Lafitte. Now, why was a general meeting with a pirate? Well, he needed help with the impending battle with the British for the city, and he knew that Jean knew the city and its surrounding swamps and waters like the back of his hand. In exchange for full pardons, Jackson had Jean's army of pirates released from jail so that they could assist with the war, and they actually helped him turn the tide of what became known as the Battle for New Orleans. Lafitte can still be seen at his favorite spot in the bar on the second floor, wearing his hat and indulging himself with food and drink. Others have spotted the ghosts of Andrew Jackson, as well as Marie Laveau and Madame Lalaurie, both of whom we'll talk about in a little while. With all of these spirits around and reports of slamming doors, footsteps, and flying bottles, I'd stay away from here. In our number 7 spot, we have the Faulkner House. William Faulkner was a Nobel Prize winning author who wrote many amazing works, including The Sound and the Fury and As I Lay Dying. Faulkner moved to this house on Pirates Alley in the 1920s, and it's actually where he wrote his first novel, A Soldier's Pay. The house was bought by a couple in 1990 and turned into a bookstore, but apparently Faulkner never left. Visitors report the smell of pipe smoke, which the author was smoking constantly, while the new owners were not, as well as books falling off the shelves, usually books written by him. I feel like buying a haunted book is just a recipe for trouble, even if it's a classic. Number 6, Le Petit Theatre. Established in 1916, this theater has been the host to many plays and performers over the years, but one has become more infamous than the rest. In 1930s, many plays were coming through, touring the South, and one of them was led by a performer called Caroline. Her last name has been lost to time. Right before a performance, she decided to go for a walk outside on the theater's balcony and tragically fell over the rail and lost her life. Now, visitors of the theater who go stand in the spot she fell from report a sudden drop in temperature and feel a pull towards the edge. Some people also say that they've seen Caroline's reflection in the water of the theater's fountain, still in costume, ready to go on stage. What is it with NOLA and haunted theaters? Number 5, Sultan's Palace. In 1839, Jean-Baptiste Lepret purchased a lavish half-story mansion from a struggling dentist as a new home for his brother, who just so happened to be a sultan from a far-off land. When the sultan arrived by ship, he brought with him a harem of wives, eunuchs, and all sorts of lavish furniture, all of which paraded through the street on their way to the house. Townspeople who lived nearby heard all-night parties and the smell of smoke emanating from within the palace, and were put off that they were never invited. But one day a man was walking by and he saw something shocking: blood dripping down the front steps and forming a pool in the street. The man fled to a police station to tell them about what he'd found, and when the police arrived, they saw quite a grisly scene. Bodies were lying all over the floor, some with missing limbs, some cut open and broken as though some sort of beast had torn them apart. But the most disturbing find was in the courtyard, where through the wet soil a hand was reaching up but not moving, as if whoever belonged to it was asking for help after being buried alive. When they dug him up, they recognized him as the Sultan himself. The case was never solved, but it was believed to be the brother's doing that caused the horrors, as his body was never found, and he had the most to gain from the Sultan's death. Number 4. Pharmacy Museum. Now, I know a pharmacy museum doesn't sound that exciting, but stay with me here. In 1823, Louis de Filo, the nation's first licensed pharmacist, opened a pharmacy where the museum now stands, and ran it successfully for years. But in 1855, he sold it to Dr. Joseph Dupas, who lived there until he died of syphilis in 1867. But it seems that he got what he deserved. Dr. Dupas allegedly was performing shocking experiments on pregnant slaves, as well as other horrible things like poisoning with what he told people was medicine. It is said that his spirit is doomed to haunt the museum, where some of the remnants of his grotesque experiments still remain, and visitors have reported seeing him in a brown suit, throwing books, and even pushing people to the ground. He seems like a vengeful spirit, so stay away from here. Number 3. Marie Laveau's house. Marie Laveau is perhaps one of the most well-known and allegedly most powerful voodoo practitioners of all time. Born in 1794, she was the student and successor of Dr. John, a voodoo priest who was supposedly an African prince from Senegal. She would often conduct business in Congo Square, earning the favor of slaves by giving them charms, cures, and even spells in return for information on their masters. She used this information when the masters requested her services to impress them in a simpler way before showing her true power and conducting rituals. The house where she lived was also said to be a meeting place for people, where they performed chants and rituals late into the night. The house was torn down in 1903, but a new structure, which is now a vacation rental, was built on the same foundations, and some say that that's how her spirit still remains in the house. One couple recounted the story of their stay, where late one night they heard chanting and drumming. They checked outside, but there was no one there. When they realized the sounds were coming from the empty living room, they decided to not sleep there that night. Good call. When they returned the next morning, there was a single pristine feather lying in the middle of the living room, but all of the doors and the windows were locked tight. They checked out immediately and never returned, because to a voodoo practitioner, a feather is good luck, but to an unsuspecting person, it is an omen of death or a hex having been placed upon you. So stay away from here if you don't wish to be cursed. Number 2. St. Louis Cemetery. Number 1. Established in 1789, this cemetery is New Orleans' oldest extant gravesite and is also considered one of the most haunted cemeteries in the US. With over 700 tombs and over 100,000 dead buried here, it makes sense that there would be some spirits that hung around. While most ghosts are said to haunt the places that they died, and not their graves, something about this place draws them in, and there are some very famous ones who reside here. Allegedly, our good friend Marie Laveau is seen here more often than anywhere else, though some claim that she still lives after creating an immortality potion, and she comes here, where her tomb also resides, to communicate with the dead, only to be mistaken for a spirit. It's said that if you place 3 X's on her tomb, your wish will be granted, and if it is, you must return and place a gift, or you will face the consequences. Some people report falling ill here, sudden bruises or cuts appearing, and hearing voices. Other spirits of the cemetery include that of a sailor whose family tomb was sold out from under him while on the high seas, and he's looking for somewhere to rest his soul. And finally, we reach number 1, the house of Madame Delphine Lalaurie. Delphine was a wealthy woman of high stature who married into even more riches and a grand house. She was also played by Kathy Bates in season 3 of American Horror Story. Her and her husband were often heard screaming and arguing all the way from the street, and he eventually left her after finding out some of her dark secrets. Lalaurie was a monstrous woman who performed terrible experiments on slaves that worked in her house, and her world came crashing down when a fire started in her home. When men arrived to put the fire out, they found many horrors in the attic. They found 7 slaves who were suspended by the neck and stretched and bent into horrible positions which they were bound into. Some had pieces of skin flayed off or missing limbs, and one woman had apparently had her bones broken such that she could be fit into a box. Delphine fled the city that night and never returned, but it's said that the ghosts of those who were mutilated mutilated there haunt the house looking for their revenge. A man who lived there in the 1900s heard the voices telling him to do horrible things, and eventually he took his own life, proving that the spirits want no one to enter the house where such atrocities happened.
Starting us off with number 10 are the Vampire Brothers. Has anyone seen the originals or the Vampire Diaries? I feel like these legends sort of remind me of that plotline with vampires in New Orleans, etc. But anyway, during the 30s, brothers John and Wayne Carter lived somewhere in the French Quarter of New Orleans. During the day they worked as laborers and tried to keep to themselves as much as possible. But one day a woman somehow escaped from their apartment bleeding as she went because her wrists had been slit. Police later found multiple other people tied to chairs with their wrists slit in their apartment alongside dozens of dead bodies that had no blood. The story was that the brothers kidnapped the people to drink their blood every night after work. It took more than 8 police officers to hold down and catch the brothers before they were executed and buried. But the weirdest part was that years later, when another Carter in the family was being buried, the brothers' bodies had vanished from the vault. Legend goes on to say you can still see them roaming around New Orleans today, and someone who owned their apartment years ago said he once saw 2 figures that matched their description whispering to each other and then jumping off a 3rd floor balcony. That's basically the original's plotline. It's not even funny. Maybe it was based on this, it probably was and I just don't know. Coming in at number 9 is the La Prette Massacre. I'm just loving these, they're just so juicy. Louisiana is filled with so many legends, I just love this. But anyway, towards the latter half of the 1800s, a rich man from Turkey owned La Prette House and also claimed he was a deposed sultan. The man transformed the house into an Eastern pleasure palace essentially. The doors and windows were blocked with bars, incense filled the air, and men guarded the house as well. The gates were locked, so the place really was like an inescapable fortress. The house even had a harem filled with girls of all ages as well as young boys too. If that wasn't enough cause for alarm, one morning neighbors saw blood trickling out from under the iron gates. The police were called straight away and they forced open the doors to a scene of pure horror. Blood was everywhere. All over the walls and floors there were amputated limbs, headless bodies, and all the harem girls and guys, even the guards, had been sexually assaulted. And you'd think it was the Turk who had gone insane, but he was also found mutilated and buried alive somewhere on the property. As to the perpetrators, people think that maybe they were a pirate's crew that had unfinished business with the man, or maybe the Turk's own family. But can you imagine? There was so much blood it was oozing out of the property. That's horrific. Anyone staying in the house after that has seen people in Eastern clothing roaming the halls, and even sounds of footsteps supposedly from all the people who have died there. At number 8 we have the Grunge. So the east of New Orleans was mostly just woodland initially, and legend has it a group of humans called the Grunge used to live in those woods. They were said to be a mix of dwarves and albinos who were forced to live there because people thought they were made by the devil, but then they inbred into something else completely. People said their offspring became inhuman in appearance. Grunge Road was meant to be a place where teens could go to make out if they weren't scared, but people started to go missing. Some goats and then actual people, all drained of blood and dead. And as this was happening, more and more strange deformed creatures started being seen. Apparently people believed that the people in the forest sold their souls for a beast that could protect them from everyone in society, whereas others believed after years of receiving cruel treatment they just went insane. They were murderous and cannibalistic, and it's said that if you see a stray goat that looks like it needs help near those parts, you shouldn't stop because it's just a trap. Filling our number 7 slot is Marie Laveau. Sorry if my French accent's bad, it probably is. And if you've seen American Horror Story Coven, then you already know who this woman is. Born in 1801, Marie was a central figure in New Orleans famous for voodoo. She had a lot of power and prestige and worked as a hairdresser, which essentially meant she basically knew the secrets of everyone in town. Rich, poor, black, white, she knew it all about everyone. She was the first person to mix voodoo with Catholicism to form a new religion that's still practiced today. It's called New Orleans Voodoo. The legend goes that although Marie died in 1881, she resurrects every year on St. John's Eve to lead the faithful in worship. Her ghost, as well as her daughter's ghost who continued her magic after she died, have been spotted numerous times around New Orleans. Now at number 6 is the Rougarou or the Loup Garou. Now this is a legend that's been passed down from generation to generation. This creature is meant to be like a werewolf elf of sorts and is a pale white color. It wanders the streets during the night looking for a hero, which is a bit of a plot twist. It causes havoc in crowds until someone stabs or shoots it. When the first drop of blood comes out of it, the Rougarou turns back into a man and tells the person his real name. He'll go on to warn the hero that they can't mention the incident to anyone for a full year or they too will become a Rougarou themselves. Mostly parents tell their children about the tale to stop them from misbehaving, but it is apparently true. Coming in at number 5 is Madame Mignet Canal, I think. Probably not. Now, she wasn't famous or anyone well known, and I don't think anyone would have known who she was today if she hadn't committed suicide on the 3rd floor of her house. She hung herself from an overhead beam, but before doing it, she also killed her own small white dog. And after that, and after World War II, the house was sold to the grandparents of someone called Ramon. Now, Ramon said growing up when him and his siblings were misbehaving, their punishment would be sitting alone on the staircase going up to the 3rd floor. He remembered that every time he did that, he saw a woman wearing a white dress that he just didn't recognize, and she always had with her a small white dog. One night he woke the whole house because he was screaming in his room. When the lights came on in his bedroom, his cheek was bright red because someone had slapped him in his sleep. Even his father met her. He climbed into bed one night hoping to hug his wife, but instead was hugging this ghost. They saw a woman standing over one of the babies' cribs and they could see through her. They even used to hear barking from the 3rd floor when they definitely did not have a dog. Haunting confirmed. At number 4 is Count Saint Germain. Now, Count Saint Germain was the epitome of a vampire, or what you've been told is a vampire based off, stuff like Twilight. He spoke 6 languages, was a master at the violin and piano, and he also composed his own music. He was insanely rich even though no one knew where his wealth came from, but he claimed he was the son of Francis II, who was the Prince of Transylvania. So his wealth could have been from being royalty, but no one even knew anything about his family or lineage. There was just no information about him. But supposedly he was very skilled at alchemy and had figured out how to attain immortality. He looked around 40 years old in all his portraits, and that look lasted for over half a century, and no one's 40 for that long, honey. Even at social dinners, no one ever saw him eat. He would just sip wine and speak about things that just made you feel inferior. He died in 1784, but there have been countless stories of people having seen him after that. In the 20th century, a man moved to New Orleans called Jacques Saint Germain, who looked exactly like the Count and had the same wealth and knowledge, again having dinner parties but only ever sipping wine. Apparently one night a woman stayed late at his house and he tried to bite her neck, but she escaped and reported it to the police. When they went to investigate, he was nowhere to be found. What they did find was cloths with blood on them and bottles of wine, and the policemen decided to pour themselves wine but found that the wine wasn't just wine, it was wine mixed with human blood. Vampire confirmed. Filling our number 3 slot is the slave girl of Myrtle's Plantation. Now, this happened during a time where racial segregation was still prevalent in America and slavery was still a thing. In the 1800s, Myrtle's Plantation was a lovely establishment owned by Judge Clark Woodruff, where he lived with his wife and 2 daughters as well as a few slaves. I'm talking few, but it was probably more than a dozen. A respected man of integrity to the town, but behind closed doors he liked to have his way with his female slaves. Chloe was one of those slaves. She was disgusted by the advances but thought if she didn't oblige, then he'd kick her out to the fields with the other slaves. And nobody wants to be on the field. So she complied, but after a while she thought maybe he was just getting tired of her. Just a side note, he twisted her ear once really badly to the point she started wearing a turban to cover her wound, and I swear this becomes important later on. But anyway, she wanted to concoct a plan to win his favor again, and the opportunity came when his eldest daughter was having her birthday party. Chloe went and picked an oleander plant knowing the leaves had a bit of poison, which she then added to the birthday cake. Her plan was that if the family got a bit sick, she could nurse them and prove herself. She liked the children. She was actually careful to only add a bit of the plant, but she grossly miscalculated. Soon after, the daughters and the judge's pregnant wife were all dead. Talk about a grave mistake. So scared of what the judge would do to them because of Chloe, the other slaves formed a lynch mob and kidnapped Chloe while she slept and hung her. When she died, they threw her body into the Mississippi Mississippi River. The judge turned the plantation into a bed and breakfast later on, and guests said they saw small kids in the hallway mirrors and heard them calling out to each other. Very much later, a new owner took a picture of the house and saw a shadowy person on the veranda that was wearing a turban. So people theorize the souls of these women are trapped on the property forever. Now at number 2 are the Casket Girls. Now because of the reputation that New Orleans had back in the day, treacherous, some of the highest murder rates, notorious for missing persons, the area had trouble getting women to move there. And I mean rightfully so. Most men there were originally sent there because they were murderers, thieves, culprits of any crime really. But thankfully there was a boat full of women coming that the French had convinced to move to the city during colonization, but they all abandoned ship in Mobile, Alabama. Now these girls were called the Casket Girls because they carried small chests with them, but the chests were shaped like mini coffins. So when most of them escaped the boat, they left behind 300 coffins. Most of them were said to be empty, but some were rumored to contain the bodies of the undead, aka vampires. They were also nailed shut because they had a habit of opening themselves, which is just already suspicious. Later in 1978, a pair of reporters wanted to see the coffins, but the convent's priest said no. So the reporters climbed over the wall one night with all their equipment to see the coffins in real life. The next day their equipment was thrown over the street outside, and on the front steps of the convent were their decapitated bodies, as well as 80% of their blood gone, and no one knows what happened to them. I mean, there are theories. And finally, at number 1 is La Laurie House. And I feel like this story has been in so many shows and movies, so most people probably do know about this one, but it's still a key legend from Louisiana. Located at 1140 Royal Street, this house is still one of the most haunted houses in New Orleans. During the 1800s, Dr. Louis La Laurie and his wife Delphine were known for always hosting lavish dinners there. She was charismatic and well respected, but Delphine had a sadistic dark side. The house had dozens of slaves, and she used to torture every single one of them. Due to cruelty laws, some of her slaves were auctioned off, but she just made her relatives buy them back for her in secret. She kept her cook change the fireplace for one, and she chased a young girl off the roof of her house with a whip. People started becoming suspicious when they started noticing that the slaves came and went quite quickly at the house, and some just straight up disappeared. Her neighbor actually saw the slave girl jumping to her death from the roof, and so rumors went around more and more, and people started declining invitations to the house. In 1834, a massive fire broke out in the house, supposedly started by the cook, and it went through the whole house. Honestly, if I was the cook, I would have done a lot more than just arson. But anyway, after the blaze was out, firefighters found a door, a secret bar door in the attic that hid more than a dozen other slaves. They were all chained to the wall, locked in dog cages, or strapped to makeshift operating tables. Body parts were all around the floor, heads, intestines, all of it, just in buckets around the room. Their treatment was horrible. Women had their stomachs sliced open and their intestines were wrapped around their waists. One woman had animal poo in her mouth and then it was sewn shut. There were a lot more, but I'll just leave it there. And either way, it was known that Delphine acted alone and a mob gathered outside her house, but she and her family vanished. Some say they went to France or wherever, but hauntings started at the house as soon as they fled. Cries, groans, everything was heard, and finding anyone to live there was nearly impossible.
The Grudge Road Monster digs its teeth in at number 10. This scary looking creature has been apparently spotted all over New Orleans. People say it looks like a goat creature with leather or scaly green skin and sharp spines. He has long horns running down his back and he stands about 3 to 4 feet high. The Grudge is very intelligent and he can even open doors, use tools, and he has a piercing scream. His name was derived from a road that is located in eastern New Orleans. People who were seen as misfits were forced to live in this area as a way to try to clean up the city. Well, shortly after, people started to report a bunch of disappearances. It was believed that this monster was responsible for killing all of these missing people, and a lot of people have even claimed that they've seen the Grudge Road Monster feasting on animals and eating out of dumpsters. La Feu Follet, or the Cajun Fairy, burns onto our list in at number 9. According to the legend, these fairies fairies are souls of dead people who appear as balls of fire in the swampy area surrounding New Orleans. But they can also be extremely evil in order to mislead people. They can cause people to wander in the swamps where they eventually drown. Even to this day, people still warn people not to follow any fiery balls of light or they risk the possibility of dying. Lafayette's Blacksmith Shop Bar brings us to number 8. This is a small tavern that is located on the corner of Bourbon and St. Philip. It was built in the early 1700s and it is one of the oldest surviving buildings in New Orleans. According to the legend, a French-American pirate robbed ships on the Gulf of Mexico and he buried his treasure in the building's bricks. So now there is a fireplace grate in the downstairs bar and it is rumored to be the resting place of his fortune. Some people say that you can see ghostly red eyes staring from the grate, and other legends say that this ghost guards the treasure and he haunted the bar. Some people have even claimed to see his ghost. St. Louis Cemetery number 1 haunts us in at number 7. This creepy cemetery is probably one of the most haunted and historic cemeteries in New Orleans. There are hundreds of ghost stories about the cemetery that dates back over 200 years, but the most infamous ghost that haunts this site is Marie Laveau, the queen of voodoo. When she was alive, she was very interested in blending Catholicism with voodoo in order to make a new religion. She practiced black magic, and she even taught her daughter how to perform voodoo rituals and spells. She died in 1881, but according to the legend, she returns to life once every year on St. John's Eve to convert people to worship her. If you disrespect her spirit, it is believed that she will physically punish you. So if you want to see if this is only an urban legend, there are tours that will take you to her grave, but do you guys really want to find out if this is more than just a legend? Yeah, I don't think so. I know I wouldn't step foot on her grave, and I wouldn't lose sleep not knowing if this was real or not. La Prada House takes us to number 6. This was the site of one of the most gruesome mass slayings in New Orleans history. In the late 1830s, a wealthy man from Turkey moved into a mansion, but he also brought in a lot of people to live there with him. Well, over the years, the mansion was known for its mysterious parties, but one morning, a neighbor noticed blood trickling from beneath the gates. Once the police entered the mansion, they found the Turkish man was buried alive in the yard, and all of his servants were mutilated, assaulted, and murdered. To this day, the ghosts of his servants can be found wandering and haunting the home, screaming in terror. Scaring us in at number 5, we have a haunted hotel. Hotel Monteleone was built in 1886, and it was a very luxurious hotel in New Orleans. Over the years, hotel staff and guests have experienced unexplainable and scary encounters with the paranormal. Locked doors would mysteriously open and close themselves every night, elevators would stop on the wrong floors, and lead people into some dark hallways. Sometimes you can even see ghostly images of children playing in abandoned hallways. The legend says that a former employee who died in this hotel still roams the halls, and the spirit of the little boy haunts the halls as well. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely wouldn't spend one night in this creepy hotel. And now at number 4, we have the LaLaurie Mansion. This very expensive mansion was situated on Royal Street, and it was occupied in 1832 by the LaLaurie family. Delphine LaLaurie was a very rich and successful woman, but she also had a dark and evil side to her. It was rumored that she tortured the slaves and servants that lived in her home. One day, a fire started in the kitchen by one of her servants because they were tired of being abused. When the fire was finally put out, the authorities were shocked by what they discovered. They saw the remains of tortured and chained slaves, and their bodies were severely mutilated. However, Delphine managed to escape and she fled to France, but the horrors that happened in the mansion weren't over. People still report that they can hear loud screams of the victims whenever someone new moves in, and strange things happen all the time here. A scary looking werewolf nibbles his way into number 3. The Rougarou is an urban legend that parents tell their children in order to prevent them from misbehaving. This scary looking creature is believed to be a human that is able to transform into a werewolf. One legend says that this creature will hunt down and kill Catholics who do not follow Lent, but according to another legend, the Rougarou causes a lot of mischief in the streets until someone can kill it. But just before it dies, it becomes human again and warns its killer not to tell anyone about his death for 1 year. If you don't listen to his instructions, you will become the next Rougarou. The Devil Man sinks his teeth in at number 2. In 1938, a devilish man was believed to roam the streets of Algiers, and he loved to harass couples. People describe him as having long black horns, bright pink ears that were shaped like stars, and he also had huge cartoon eyes. Although he never killed anyone permanently, I'm not even sure what that means. He never killed anyone permanently. He have killed people. They were killed and then they were all of a sudden not killed. Well, he was said to induce temporary deaths onto his victims. So a lot of people who came into contact with the Devil Man have reported that their lives flashed before their eyes. They would also be cursed with terrible nightmares long after their encounter with the devil, which could haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Vampires of New Orleans bites into number 1. Rumors about vampires living in New Orleans have been going on for years. However, maybe this next urban legend isn't just a story. Locals believe that New Orleans is a home to a ton of real vampires. During the 1930s, 2 brothers named John and Wayne Carter were executed for committing multiple murders. There was about a dozen bodies that were drained of their blood, and they were discovered after one woman managed to escape from their apartment. However, even after their death, lots of people reported that they have seen the brothers roaming in the streets, possibly looking for their next victim. And this is really strange because their body had mysteriously disappeared from the family's funeral vault. So what the heck happened?
Starting us off at number 10, the Hanging Jail. Actually called the Beauregard Parish Jail, it opened in 1915 and it was actually kind of a big deal because it had extraordinary amenities for a jail. Each cell had a window and a bathroom, and cells on the top floor even had a skylight. But despite its beautiful architecture, it was also the site of Louisiana's first double execution. In 1926, 2 men were committed after killing and robbing a taxi driver and sentenced to be hanged. They claimed innocence, but still the verdict passed and the 2 men died in the jail, giving it the infamous name. It remained open until 1981, and now a museum. It's believed to be haunted by the 2 men along with other inmates who felt they were unjustly put behind bars. Many have reported being pushed or hearing voices while visiting, and some have even captured photos of strange, inexplicable, shadowy figures lurking on the porch and window, leaving no other explanation than to assume the jail remains a haunted and terrifying place to visit. Coming in at number 9, Pleasant Hall. This story has 2 versions, so I will let you decide which one you think is true. Once upon a time, while attending the Louisiana State University, a resident tragically took her life in the now infamous room 312. One story says the girl killed her boyfriend in a fit of rage and then, shocked at her actions, took her own life because she could not live with what she had done. The other story claims the girl jumped out of the window of her room and fell to her impending doom, terrifying the students on campus that witnessed the horrifying sight. But which one really happened? Well, it seems that is the hard part to find out. But what's not difficult to know is that the spirit of the girl remains, haunting Pleasant Hall to this day. Students have reported seeing her ghost roam the campus and hearing strange noises coming from the other side of room 312. And sometimes at night, when you least expect it, the door to room 312 will open and shut all on its own. Coming in at number 8, St. Louis Cemetery number 1. Regarded as the city of the dead, the St. Louis Cemetery number 1 holds more ghost stories than you'd want to encounter in a lifetime. In the span of a mere block, the cemetery has over 700 tombs and over 100,000 bodies are known to be buried at the site. Most famously, it is the burial site of Voodoo Queen Marie Laveau, the most revered and feared practitioner in New Orleans. Orleans history. Reports of her ghost have detailed her in her signature red and white turban, and claim she will suddenly appear out of nowhere and then vanish from plain sight just as fast. Visitors have experienced scratching, pinching, shoving, suddenly becoming ill, and even hearing her haunting voice echo across the cemetery, sending many that have dared to visit running for the hills. So just be careful if you choose to stop by. If you aren't careful, she could curse you for life. Next up at number 7, the Calcasieu Courthouse. The history of capital punishment is a torrid one, and as it turns out, this courthouse is actually famous for just that. Back in the 1940s, there was a woman named Toni Jo McCuiston. She lived quite a tumultuous life involved in drugs and her local brothel, but one day she fell in love with a man who frequented her establishment named Claude Henry, and so they got married and she started to really turn her life around. But after Claude was sent to jail for 50 years for killing someone, something inside Toni snapped. She planned to bust Claude out of jail with a friend, but in the process of stealing a car, killed the owner and left him in a ditch. She was caught and sentenced to death and would become the first ever woman to be executed by the electric chair in Louisiana. It's said her spirit still haunts the courthouse, locking doors and messing around with the filing systems during the day. But steer clear at night, as residents report you can smell her burning hair and hear her unruly screams echo through the streets. Coming in at number 6, Pea Farm. Nicknamed the Pea Farm, it is not actually a farm, nor does it have anything to do with peas. It is, however, an old abandoned prison. The facility was in operation between 1905 to 1950, and rumor has it that life was incredibly rough and difficult at the Pea Farm for prisoners, even more so than your typical prison. Beatings and lashings were commonplace, and even killing of prisoners was nothing to bat an eye at. So it's no surprise that those whose life may have ended here have stuck around, maybe trying to seek revenge on those who hurt them. Today, the prison is strictly off limits to visitors, but those that walk past have reported hearing shrieks and other strange noises coming from inside the abandoned building. Maybe no one is allowed for a good reason. Next up at number 5, Bonnie and Clyde's ambush site. Maybe you've heard of the infamous couple, but just in case you haven't, let me catch you up. They were notorious bank robbers across Louisiana and Texas during the Great Depression in America and made quite a name for themselves. In recent years, it has been suggested their exploits were exaggerated, but one thing that wasn't is how they died. The day was May 23rd, 1934, and police from both Louisiana and Texas managed to corner them in their stolen car. Authorities fired more than 100 bullets at the couple, and as the story goes, you could hear Bonnie's scream from the next town over. Residents claim that if you visit the site of their death, the ghosts of the couple will make themselves well known to you. Apparitions have shown in photographs, and some have even heard what they believe to be Bonnie's scream as she took her last few breaths on this earth. Coming in at number 4, Oak Alley. Once upon a time, it was one of the largest plantations in Louisiana, and just like every other of its kind, it has a dark past. Since its dark days, it has turned into a bed and breakfast and historical site, but the people that were tortured remain, haunting the ground and terrorizing visitors. Numerous accounts have claimed to hear unexplained sounds like blood-curdling screams in the middle of the night, or the sound of a horse-drawn carriage clopping along the path. Some visitors have even experienced being touched or grabbed by an unseen entity, and one investigator got so scared he dropped his camera while trying to capture a spirit. Paranormal investigators have managed to capture several EVPs that indicate unhappy ghosts lingering the property, and though no one has been hurt staying here yet, tread carefully as you never know just when you could set the spirits off. Coming in at number 3, Alice's grave. Alice died in the 19th century, and although she had a fairly normal life while alive, her death and afterlife were anything but expected. She was laid to rest in an above-ground grave, but soon after, many of the townspeople began to question, was the grave haunted, or worse, was Alice a witch? As the legend goes, in the middle of the night, the large slab of marble covering her grave was removed on 3 separate occasions, and each time, her remains were left outside the grave. No one stepped forward admitting to have moved Alice or the slab, which led people to believe that Alice was a witch trying to escape her grave and haunt the town. Eventually, large iron bars were placed over the grave in an attempt to hold her spirit inside. But this hasn't seemed to stop her, as locals claim you can still see her wandering the cemetery at night. But just exactly what is she looking for? That is one of the many unanswered questions that leave visitors terrified, unsure if she comes in peace or if she is out for revenge. Next up at number 2, the Manchac Swamp. While many are familiar with the legendary voodoo priestess Marie Laveau, she was not the only one of her time. Julia Brown was a well-respected healer and midwife who resided in a small village called Frenier. At first, she loved caring for her village, but after some time she started to feel disrespected by her community, feeling as though they were taking her gifts for granted. Julia began scaring the village, telling them dooming predictions about their impending deaths, and the townspeople, unsure if she was placing a curse or foretelling their future, became very troubled. Shortly before her own death, she said, "One day I'm gonna die and I'm gonna take all you with me." And just days after she was buried, 3 entire villages were destroyed by a hurricane and hundreds of lives were lost. To this day, many believe the spirit of Julia Brown haunts the swamp, and visitors have reported hearing blood-curdling screams and the sound of her voice singing cryptic and frightening songs, terrifying all those that dare walk by. And last up in our number 1 spot, La Laurie Mansion. Arguably one of the most infamous buildings in all of Louisiana, La Laurie Mansion was once home to the cruel and torturous Madame Delphine La Laurie. Even in her time, she was regarded as a monster and was known to have her slaves taken from her on more than one occasion due to their outrageous mistreatment. In 1834, a fire broke out in her mansion, and when police and fire marshals arrived at the site, they found one of her slaves chained to the stove, claiming to have started the fire to try and take her own life to escape the cruelty. Another 7 victims were found in her attic, suspended from the ceiling, mutilated and barely alive, stating to have been imprisoned for months. Once news broke out of her cruelties, citizens attacked the house and demolished everything they could. While the original building no longer stands, the grounds it stood on are some of the most haunted in all of Louisiana, as it's believed nearly 100 people lost their lives under Madame Delphine's cruel supervision. Visitors have reported feeling the violent touches of ghostly hands, and a medium that visited stated that there is a very dark demonic entity that resides within the building's walls. So just tread carefully. Should you choose to visit, the spirits that live there are not too thrilled by visitors in their home.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the White Cemetery. This one comes from the village of Barrington, Illinois. There lies the White Cemetery. Locals say that if you have to drive past it, don't stop, always keep going. They say that spirits of the dead have been wandering around outside the gates there since the 1820s. Police and other reliable eyewitnesses have reported seeing apparitions that vanish before their very eyes. Phantom cars come and then go. One time, a house burned down under mysterious circumstances, and in the years since then, it keeps appearing and disappearing. Be warned though, they say you should never enter that house if you see it. When it disappears into the mist, you'll disappear with it forever. If that wasn't enough for you, there's also been reports of a woman with a lantern looking for a ride from passers-by. I'm sure you guys know by now what not to do if you see her. Next up at number 9 now, we have the Boggy Creek Monster. If you ever find yourself in a town of Fouke in Arkansas, ask them about the Boggy Creek Monster. For generations there, locals have shared stories of a creature that roams the area. They say it stands between 7 and 8 feet tall and weighs almost 300 pounds. Its chest, legs and arms are covered with thick hair. Sometimes these Sasquatch-like stories are relatively recent, but the legend of the Boggy Creek Monster goes way back. The first sightings of it came in 1834. Locals reported that a wild man was roaming the area. When groups set out to find him, he retreated back into the hills. By the 1900s, sightings around the town were becoming more frequent. By the end of the century, residents of the town reported seeing the animal more often. In 1997 alone, there were 40 sightings sightings. In all that time, people have claimed the animal was nocturnal, but in 2000, a sighting occurred in broad daylight in the Sulphur River Wildlife Area near the town. In the years since then, the sightings have only continued, drawing visitors in who want a glimpse of the Boggy Creek monster. Next up at number 8 now, we have the Wicked Witch of Monroe. This is the story of Hannah Cranner, born in 1783. She lived near Cutler's Farm Road in the town of Monroe, Connecticut. She was said to dabble in black magic. Now, according to accounts, nobody accused her of being a witch until her husband died. He was Captain Joseph Hovey. The tale goes that one night he went out for a walk but somehow fell off a cliff. The locals didn't believe this was possible though, and rumors spread that Hannah had somehow bewitched him, that he had lost his mind and then fallen off the cliff in a daze. They said she was a witch. Hannah used this reputation to her advantage. She would often demand free food and firewood, or else she would curse the townspeople. One woman denied her a fresh-baked pie, so Hannah cursed her so that she could never bake again. She also caught a man fishing on her property, cursed him, and he could never fish again. Over the years, she gained complete control over the locals, and that was ultimately her downfall. She had a rooster named Old Boreas, which some said was her familiar, a sort of spiritual companion that witches are supposed to have. Shortly after the rooster died, she told a neighbor that her end was also near. She said her coffin must be carried by hand to the graveyard and she must not be buried before sunset. She died the next day. It was snowing heavily. The locals decided to ignore her instructions and thought it would be easier to pull her casket across the snow on a sled. As the procession started, the coffin fell off the sled and slid all the way back down to her front door. They tried and failed again. In the end, they decided to just carry her to the graveyard like she asked for. They buried her just after sundown. When they returned to her house though, they found it engulfed in flames in the middle of the snow. Ever since then, the sight of her house and her grave has been attracting paranormal investigators, many of whom say her vengeful spirit still lives on. Moving on to number 7 now, we have Homie the Clown. In the 1990s, every school kid in Chicago had heard the story of Homie the Clown. Many of them had actually seen him. In the autumn of 1991, there were reports of a man in a white van who stalked school kids on their way home and lured them in. If that wasn't scary enough, he was also dressed as a clown. Locals named him Homie after a character from the comedy show Living Color, but this was no laughing matter. Strange rumors began to spread about Homie. Perhaps the strangest aspect of the creepy stalker was that he seemed to be everywhere in the city. School kids all over Chicago reported seeing him. It didn't matter who you were or what school you went to, everybody avoided white vans. Nobody wanted to get caught by Homie. At one point, even the police began to investigate it, but they soon passed over the case. Sightings of Homie began to decrease by the mid-90s, and now some people are left wondering what really did happen. Was it just a made-up story that got out of hand, or did Homie get what he wanted and leave town? For now, at least. Next up at number 6 now, we have Lake Lanier. It didn't take me very long to find countless stories online about what some people say is Georgia's most cursed lake. They say evil has seeped into the very water there. It wraps itself around any visitors who ignore the locals' warnings. The lake is man-made, created in the 1950s to provide hydroelectricity and water supply to Atlanta. The project was plagued with problems from the beginning. Funding cuts halted work a number of times. Neighboring states bickered over water flow requirements and how the water should be used. In order to fill the lake up, the government had to move 250 families, 15 businesses, and even relocate 20 cemeteries along with the corpses. Entire towns were then submerged. They say the lake was cursed for the trouble it had caused, especially to the dead. In the years since, there have been a highly unusual number of deaths linked to the lake. They've ranged from boating accidents, drownings, to cars crashing off the road and into the water. Boats have sunk or hit invisible objects. Strong swimmers have drowned in calm conditions. Locals have reported feeling as if they were being pulled underwater by unseen hands, or feeling the air leave their lungs out of nowhere. In 2011 alone, 17 deaths occurred there, cementing it in people's minds as a very cursed lake. Moving on to number 5 now, we have Riverdale Road. This one comes from the town of Thornton in Colorado. It lies about 20 minutes north of Denver. It's not the most famous place in the world, but it's gaining a paranormal reputation foundation for a very creepy road, Riverdale Road. It leads to a popular hilltop overlook. One night, many years ago, a jogger was running up the road. Out of nowhere, a speeding car came over the hill and crashed into the jogger. The car sped up into the darkness, leaving the jogger to die by himself on the side of the road. They say he vowed vengeance with his dying breath, and locals say his spirit returned in anger. Now he haunts the road and looks into every single car that passes by for the killer that took his life all those years ago. They say that if you park up on the road and turn off your engine and lights, he'll think you're the one who hit him. People have reported hearing sounds of footsteps running towards them, followed by angry beating on the side of their cars and handprints appearing on the windows. If this sounds like an experience you'd like, well, at least now you know where to find it. Coming in number 4 now, we have the Hoosac Tunnel. This tunnel runs through the Hoosac mountain range in western Massachusetts. It may not look like much, but it has a very bloody history. Construction began in 1851. It took 24 years to build, and during that time, around 200 workers were killed. This earned the tunnel the nickname of the Bloody Pit. Perhaps one of the most shocking incidents came in 1867. On October 17th of that year, fumes in the 1,000-foot tunnel ignited, causing an explosion that destroyed a hoist used to lower men, equipment, and supplies. The flaming parts landed on 13 men. The area was also flooded. Rescue attempts were made to get down to them, but they failed and the men were just presumed dead. That wasn't the case though. You see, months later, workers found out that some of the men had survived, and they even made a raft to try and escape the water. In the years since then, locals swear that the 13 workers haunt the tunnel now, tied to this earth by the anger of not being saved. Moving on to number 3 now, we have the Devil's Chair. This one comes from the Alma Cemetery in Kansas. At first glance, it looks like any other cemetery. Gravestones, grass, nothing too creepy, but this cemetery is home to something else, something the locals call the Devil's Chair. According to legend, a farmer once owned all of the land in that area. He refused to sell his land so that it could be used as a cemetery. No matter how much people tried, he refused to give it up. Then, one day, he was mysteriously pushed in a well on the land and fell to his death. Authorities only found his body from the stench that came from the well a few days later. After the incident, locals began to call the well the Devil's Chair. They said it was cursed with the vengeful spirit of the dead farmer. The land was bought and the cemetery was built around the well. That's when the curse seemed to spread to the whole cemetery. As for the Devil's Chair, it was boarded up to stop anyone from meeting the same demise as the farmer. Legend says that those who have sat on the boards have been known to mysteriously disappear, victims of the farmer's vengeful spirit. Next up on number 2 now, we have Buck's Tomb. This one comes from Maine, where you can find the tomb of Colonel Buck. He was the founder of the town there called Bucksport, an honored figure in many people's eyes. But this story may have a dark twist to it. On his tombstone, there appears to be the strange image of a woman's leg. Locals say that Colonel Buck once sentenced a woman to death for being a witch. As she burned, her leg rolled out of the fire, along with her final curse against him. Her son told the colonel, "Your tomb shall bear the mark of a witch's foot for all eternity." Legend says that his heirs have tried to clean the foot off the stone many times, but still it remains. They even tried to replace the monument twice, but it still keeps coming back. These days, visitors flock to see the monument in person, but a wrought iron fence keeps them from getting any closer to this creepy tombstone. And finally, number 1 now, we have Chessie. You guys have heard of Nessie, right? The Loch Ness Monster? Good. Well, I'd like you to meet Chessie. In Maryland, it's not uncommon to hear people talk about the Chesapeake Bay Monster, Chessie for short. The first sightings began in the 1930s. The crew of a military helicopter flew over the Bush River, and they claimed they saw an unknown reptilian beast in the waters below. Now, at first, people weren't sure if they just made a mistake or even made it up altogether. Over the years, though, more and more sightings of Chessie occurred. They say it looks like an anaconda or a python, serpentine, snake-like, and dark in color. One thing everyone can agree upon is that it's huge, up to 30 feet in length and as thick as a telephone pole. Interest in the beast peaked in 1982 when one family apparently videotaped Chessie from their home on Kent Island. The Smithsonian held a mini symposium on the tape and concluded that, among other things, this was absolute evidence that something large was living in Chesapeake Bay. They didn't go on to say that it was definitely Chessie, but that's only strengthened this legend.
Starting us off at number 10, Lafitte Guest House. Once the mansion of a very rich man named Paul Glees and his family, by the 20th century the building became a hotel and has been visited by countless guests throughout the years. But despite the many families that have lived in the mansion prior, it is not them who haunts the building, but a girl named Marie who died of yellow fever while staying in room 21 with her mother. Legend has it that her mother was so distraught by Marie's death that she would often revisit the hotel and stay in the very room where Marie lost her life. And years later, she too died in room 21. The two ghosts haunt the grounds, terrifying visitors who stay in their room, perhaps hoping to convince them never to return. Those that have stayed report seeing Marie in the mirror in the middle of the night, and that during the day she can be seen walking around the grounds, striking up a conversation with you before vanishing into thin air. And if that doesn't freak you out, the mother's gut-wrenching sobs can also be heard at night, and she too has been known to frighten the guests by turning the lights on and off or throwing objects around to get your attention. All those that enter the room claim to immediately feel a sense of despair and sorrow come over them, and none that visit wish to return. Coming in at number 9, the Logan Mansion. Built in 1897 for a beer distributor named Lafayette R. Logan, this mansion is believed to be haunted by the ghost of a girl named Theodora Hunt, allegedly the neighbor of Mr. Logan, who one day leapt out of a third-floor window in the attic and plummeted to her death. For years, it has been regarded as one of the most haunted places in the state, with many recent visitors claiming to see items moving on their own, doors mysteriously locking and unlocking themselves, and the giggles of Theodora Hunt coming from the attic. While Theodora tends to be more mischievous than anything, there have been other visitors claiming to hear haunting voices and apparitions in the window where Theodora allegedly fell to her death, and some fear that she has company, and that is what most are truly afraid of. Next up at number 8, the Shreveport Municipal Auditorium. Built between 1926 to 1929, it originally served to commemorate the soldiers who served and lost their lives to World War I. Nowadays, it's a historical performance and meeting venue, and widely known to be riddled with ghosts and paranormal activity. Audience members, tour guides, and staff alike have all experienced something strange while spending time in the building, like doors opening and shutting all on their own, disembodied voices echoing throughout the halls, as well as strange, inexplicable sounds lurking in the shadows. Although not all the spirits are terrifying, one reportedly is often heard clapping and saying, "I love Johnny Cash." There are far more creepy ghosts than friendly ones. Reportedly, a girl is often seen running around the auditorium, and no one knows just who she is or why she's there. And according to legends, during the Louisiana hayride, a woman died in labor in the basement bathroom, and some claim to have heard her moans as if she is still trying to deliver. Coming in at number 7, the Miller Cemetery. Located in Eunice, Louisiana, the Miller Cemetery has more than just buried bodies to creep out visitors. One ghost in particular is known to haunt the grounds, and it's because of him that locals nicknamed it the Headless Cemetery. The Headless Ghost is known to frequent the area, roaming around the graves at night and terrifying guests. But what's strange about this ghost is he's not headless for any horrific death, but allegedly because nobody remembers his face due to the unrecognizable picture on his tombstone, or at least that's the legend we've been told. If a headless ghost isn't enough to keep you away, many have also reported their cars suddenly not working or breaking down as soon as they are on the gravel road by the cemetery. So if you do dare enter, you might just be stranded, and who knows what the headless ghost will do to you then. Next up at number 6, Forbing Tracks. Strangely, or maybe not so strangely, I don't really know the statistics on this one, Miller Cemetery is not the only place in Louisiana where a headless ghost is known to roam. The Forbing Railroad tracks as well have terrifying ghosts that many claim to haunt the grounds at night. Legend has it, one night an old man was reportedly beheaded, and his ghost now wanders the tracks holding a lantern and scaring all that see him. But that isn't all. Apparently a bunch of students also died here many years ago after allegedly being hit by an oncoming train. Legend has it that if you park your car on the tracks and put flour on the back of it, it will mysteriously begin to move on its own, showing the handprints of the students in the flour on the back. But if I were you, I would not try it out for yourself, otherwise you too might be a ghost haunting the tracks of Forbing, Louisiana. Next up at number 5, Magnolia Plantation. I am sure it comes as no surprise that a plantation would be the breeding grounds for tortured spirits, considering how much horrifying and cruel activity occurred on their property during the early to mid 19th century. And Magnolia's plantation is among some of the most haunted. There are stories that a large portion of the activity at this plantation has to do with the countless voodoo curses that were placed on the original owners, but others say that the real horrors of the property are due to the dying room. The name was given to the haunted room as there have been countless tales of slaves and other residents taking their lives in it when they could no longer endure the agony of their existence. Visitors have reported hearing their screams from the dying room to this day, as well as seeing the many spirits lurk around the property. As well, a Union Major is believed to have been poisoned in the same room, and sometimes at night you can see his distorted face in the window of the very room he died in. Others claim to have heard chanting, slamming doors, flickering lights, and investigators have even captured audio recordings from several spirits, and maybe most crazy is that motion sensors have been known to go off and on when no one was around. Listen, everyone that visits agrees they are not wanted there. Coming in at number 4, Tefrere's house. Although now it's a cozy bed and breakfast, Tefrere's has a dark history from its time as a plantation, and as such it comes with a bevy of ghost sightings that will chill you to the bone. The most well-known legend of the property is that a woman named Amélie Comeau once jumped into a well after losing her family to yellow fever. Her body was later buried on the property, and some believe she still haunts the grounds, weeping for the family she lost. Others have reported a little girl living in the attic that may come and speak to you, usually asking you to viens voir, which means come see in French, and I'm afraid to know just what she may want you to come up and see. Originally there was a piano in the house that guests could play, but it had to be removed after countless complaints of it being played in the middle of the night and waking up guests. But of course, when the owner would go to check, no one would ever be playing it. So if you're feeling brave, you can go ahead and stay, but as for me, I think I will look for somewhere where a creepy girl ghost doesn't try to swoon me into following her up into an attic. Coming in at number 3, Central Louisiana State Hospital. Believed to be haunted by the near 3,000 patients that are buried on the grounds, this psychiatric facility from 1904 is actually still operating today, believe it or not. Reportedly haunted by all those that died on its grounds, many hospital staff claim to experience extremely strange and creepy activity nearly every single day. Many say they constantly hear slamming doors from one secured only moments prior, witnessing chairs being flipped over when no one was in the room, and even glasses shattering after being hucked across the room. On one occasion, a piece of flooring was discovered broken into pieces, almost as if exploded. Nothing had been broken moments earlier, and none of the staff could figure out how it broke, or rather, what had broken it. As it's still a fully functioning hospital, it's not open to visitors, but some will walk past the building and swear they can hear strange voices or bright shining lights coming from inside the building. Coming in at number 2, Dauphine Orleans Hotel. The historic Dauphine Orleans Hotel opened somewhere around the 1770s and has remained one of the most well-known buildings in the French Quarter, but not for its hospitality, instead for its terrifying ghost sightings. Back in its heyday, there was a brothel in the French Quarter owned by a woman named May Bailey. And what was especially unique about Bailey's business was that she actually had a permit for it, making it completely legal. But despite its legality and popularity among many, May Bailey's sister, Millie, resented her for forcing her into the line of work. Hoping for a way out, Millie ended up meeting a Confederate soldier and the two got engaged. But sadly, on the morning of the wedding, her betrothed was shot dead. And so Millie remained trapped to her life of courtship. Today, visitors and staff have reported seeing her roam the halls in her wedding dress, sobbing and crying out for her lost love. But that is not the worst that's been witnessed. Employees say they routinely see glasses fall off shelves, doors unlatched after just being locked, and there is even one account of a bar stool levitating off the ground. But most terrifying of all are the legends of guests checking in and never leaving the hotel. So if I were you, I would pick somewhere else to stay for the night. And last up in our number 1 spot, Hotel Provincial. Branded as one of the most haunted places in New Orleans, the Hotel Provincial is located in the infamously haunted French Quarter, and just like every building around it, of course, it's horrifyingly haunted. Now, back in the day, there was a military hospital just down the street from the hotel, and one of the buildings used a medicinal herb garden for the hospital, which seems a little strange, but does make sense once you find out the kind of spirits that haunt the halls. Today, the hotel consists of 5 buildings, and although ghosts are known to lurk in each, the most haunted building is believed to be number 5. Guests of building number 5 have reported seeing insane things such as Confederate soldiers covered in blood, moaning from agonizing pain, who miraculously disappear once the lights turn on. Others have reported apparitions of surgeons in the halls, and maybe most disturbing is the amount of guests that have seen strange pools of blood appear on their bedding or the floor that disappear just as fast as they came into view. One guest even reported that as the elevator door opened on the hotel's 2nd floor, the hospital was entirely in view. So it seems as though the soldiers that died in the hospital down the street took a liking to the hotel and continue to haunt all the visitors who enter to this day.